Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
Point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem, the infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? So welcome to the 17th episode of Athens and Jerusalem. In this episode, you're going to experience a jam session between Cameron, me, and Stephen on the topic of truth. And the background was that Stephen discussed the difference between truth as correspondence and truth as coherence. That means that if truth is correspondence, it is verbal expressions that try to correspond, to symbolize what is existing in the external world. And he brings this all back to Plato and this idea that trying to express the forms, the ideas that lies behind everything in our world. The coherence theory doesn't believe in this kind of absolute truth or grounded truth and try to create truth as something that cohere with other expressions and other actions, so that we get like a holistic theory. But then, of course, there are the possibility of a parallel existence of other theories. When we start the jam session, it's going to start with Cameron discussing natural science. Enjoy the jam session.
Because it would seem to me that at least in natural science, a criterion of truth is not just the consistency of the theoretical explanation, but it's also the coherence between theory and empiria. I mean, somehow, how does our probes of that supposed objective reality work? I mean, do our explanatory models seem to in some way reflect that or not? Or to what extent? And I wonder whether that is something that could be also applied to other fields of science. So I don't even know if I've understood correctly that idea, but it in some way it to me it would seem that we could say that, well, just as there are laws of nature that we can both theoretically and empirically approach, there might be laws of, for instance, I don't know, inner human dynamics or at least interrelational dynamics that could have similar kind of status. So, for instance, we could say that wherever there is some sort of unity and harmony between people, things work out much better than when there is conflict and and I don't know, search for dominance or something like that.
Well, a totalitarian society can always say we have a high degree of unity and harmony.
What's that?
A totalitarian society can
Exactly,
always
that's
say
right.
we have a
Absolutely,
high degree of
absolutely.
unity and harmony.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so setting unity as the criterion for truth seems fraught.
And then you are into coherence, the idea of coherence. And echo chamber is a word that I got to think of when we talk about coherence.
Mm-hmm.
But if we should try to explain, and because I'm not very impressed of Heidegger if he believes that Plato was focusing mostly on correspondence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you read the origin of the art of Heidegger, you will see that this idea about correspondence is he focused mostly on Descartes and not on Plato. And this idea about aletheia that Heidegger uses to use as the word for truth, Wahrheit. And this word Wahrheit is also very important because it's something that you are becoming aware of. And he tried to explain aletheia as a kind of a lightning that comes out of the dark. That's how we try to explain this, that you just got this notion of something that is true and something. And this is also important because he says it is worth caring for. So it's like a pragmatic, I would say it's close to what you would find in person in William James. But then if you start to talk about Plato, then he will say that because he focused very much on mathematics, and he find mathematics as a model for understanding truth.
Yes.
And then also what he's trying to discover are these axiomatic truths that could be like a core for everything else, and then everything else gets out of this. And it's not like it's not corresponding in the way that we would say that the name dog correspond with the animal or the phenomenon dog, but it's more that he even talks about like you have like a feeling in your brain that this is correct, and the language we often we say that the language doesn't bring out the true meaning of this feeling in your brain, that you are not able to use the language to really prove or express what you in your mind or in your you can feel that is true. And this is what the axiomatic in mathematics also would, I mean, how to prove the Pythagoras.
Yeah, it seems that there's a problem with any logical attempt to formulate a true statement, because in logic you have premises, which are your starting point, and then the sequence of logical arguments to the conclusion. In mathematics, you have your axioms and the steps that lead to the conclusion. In physics, you have the initial conditions, which evolve according to the laws of nature and time to a final condition. So it's a pervasive idea of in which the logical piece, the piece in which you use, you use this assumption of there being some kind of regularity behind things, is secondary or after an initial piece, which is in some way arbitrary. The premises of a logical argument are something you just have to take as given. The axioms of mathematics you take as given. The initial conditions you take as given. And so what does that mean about truth? And then things that we consider true are things that follow from the application of these principles. So hidden and embedded within all of our ideas of truth are initial conditions of thought that ultimately go unquestioned. Well, maybe we question them, but they're taken as fact and they're not interrogated further. Perhaps we consider them so obvious there's no point interrogating it, but that's where we often go astray, because things that at one point in time we thought were obvious, so obvious they didn't need to be interrogated, end up not necessarily being true. The classic example is Euclidean geometry, where the axioms of Euclidean geometry, including the parallel line hypothesis, may actually not be true. And if you relax a certain axiom in Euclidean geometry, you go a completely different direction. You get non-Euclidean geometry, the geometry of curved spaces, which ends up actually describing the world more correctly than the Euclidean geometry. But the axiom seems so obvious to the ancient Greeks, they didn't, as far as I understand, they didn't question those axioms. So what sorts of axioms are we not questioning today? As regards either our understanding of the physical world or our understanding of religion, our understanding of philosophy. I guess the best we can do is be transparent about what our starting point is, and try to interrogate that starting point, and at least lay out as clearly as possible what the initial conditions are, what our premises are.
What I often think that when we discuss truth, then often we end up discussing scientific truth or mathematics or physics and all these different subjects. But if we look around us, and now I'm becoming more like William James, if we just look around us, then there are so many truths that we are actually being that we trust, we really trust in our normal life. And without all this trust in those truths, we couldn't have like a normal life. And I think also Heidegger, in his attempt, because he tried in some way to escape science, and he tried to escape a lot of what have happened throughout the 2000 years from Plato and still ongoing. Then if you could, then we could focus more on what we will say is like truth concerning the life of just being, the life of being a human. We started to live in a cabin or something, and start to live, working more in the soil, and that was important for him. The earth was important, not just reality, but earth. Now I'm just wondering, because in Norwegian liberal art education, if you could call it like that, in the Examens Philosophicum, as we have the first half year at university, we focus a lot on the history of ideas. And I read original Plato dialogues, and I read a lot of original philosophy. I was just wondering, Stephen, is this something that you also do in the American liberal art?
It depends on the degree, and it definitely depends on the institution. Where I went, we did spend several weeks in the first semester of the freshman year reading Plato's dialogues. So in my undergraduate experience, I think of Plato as the starting point of the intellectual journey that was my college experience. Plato, and there wasn't so much concentration on the pre-Socratics. So it kind of starts with Socrates and the Apology and Republic and so forth, as where our starting point was, and then Aristotle after that. But then after a pretty, and the Greek playwrights, but after a fair bit of time on the ancient world, it kind of fast forwards to Descartes, like the intellectual, the intellectual exploration might touch upon, say, Thomas Aquinas or something, but it skips over, 1,000, or let's say 2,000 years of rich history, and then kind of takes up the thread again right around the time of Descartes. That's my recollection anyway.
The same in Norway, I would say.
Yeah.
But also we read. I remember I read Georgia's dialogue. It's a very beautiful dialogue. It's just discussing the difference between philosophy and rhetoric or sophism, and the discussion about the possibility to persuade someone or to really to have an argument and to prove something, to tell the truth. And one of the what I really liked with that dialogue was that they discuss the possibility of lying. Is it possible to lie? And if there's no truth, then the possibility of lying are there neither. So we are not able to lie if there's no truth. And that's also something I find very interesting also in our society. Could we say to someone that but sorry, you are lying, you're not telling the truth? Or is there something that no, I'm sorry, I'm just it's an alternative fact, it's just my opinion or my way of explaining something? And there's a lot of William James, he was criticizing empirism. All kind of empirical studies would always end up in some kind of relativism. The same with all these kind of historicism, that everything has some kind of origin or starting point. And what is the main focus is that, okay, of course everything has to begin. I mean, but someone has actually been able to understand that truth, but that doesn't mean that it's not valid. So we have to differ between what is the historical or origin of something and what is the validity of something.
A valid logical argument can be preposterous, valid in the technical sense, because the premises might be preposterous.
Yeah. If I'm cutting a tree, then I use the relation between the circle and the diametrical dimension of the circle of the tree, and I know that the circle will always be 3.14 larger than the diameter.
Yes.
And for me, that's a truth.
Yes.
And I use it.
Yes. I mean, in the modern world, we've, and maybe we can partly blame Nietzsche for this. You know, Nietzsche wrote this famous article on truth and lies in a non-moral sense. And he says, what is truth? He says, it's a movable host of metaphors. You know, for him, truth is, it's like stories that are told, you know, and there is no ultimate truth. And that's definitely the direction that the modern world, modern philosophy seems to have gone. Understandably, you know, partly as a reaction to the church and its conception of ultimate truth, which then gets used as an instrument of power and oppression over others. And so one can forgive, I suppose, the modern mind for letting go of the idea of absolute truth and the possibility of making contact with absolute truth. But I mean, to sort of maybe make an argument for absolute truth. I mean, we live in a world in which certain things do seem to be true without exception, and I'm referring to the laws of physics and how matter behaves, you know, under the controlled conditions of scientific experiments, particularly elementary matter. It behaves in a very precise mathematical way that's repeatable, that's objective, that's precise, you know, and it seems as though from that perspective that Plato was onto something 2,500 years ago when his idea of truth is something which corresponds to the forms. You know, the most perfect circle is the circle that that corresponds to the form of the circle. You know, for Plato, there was a layer of reality behind the visible world. The whole metaphor of the cave is a beautiful description of that.
I think
everything conforms more or less.
He would even say that the truth exists as a phenomenon.
Yes, exists independently of us. And I think the success of the scientific project over the last few centuries is, I think, evidence in favor of that Platonic view. it does seem to be that there is an underlying pattern in the universe which everything conforms to, and we call that pattern the laws of physics. That pattern happens to be explained in mathematical language, and as far as we can see, there are no exceptions to matter following these laws. So there's a strong case to be made for the truth being out there, and that our project is the discovery of that truth that is out there, which it runs somewhat cross purposes to this alternative theory of truth that we see floated about in the modern world, or let's say the postmodern world, in which truth becomes not just an abstraction, but something which is completely relativized, and my truth and your truth really cannot be objectively evaluated in terms of its truth content. All we can talk about are power relationships, and we can talk about other sorts of human factors, but we can't talk about whether something is really true or not. And I suppose naturally incline away from that conception of truth. But at the same time, as I've gone through my own intellectual journey, I suppose I have moved a little bit away from the hard, let's say the hardcore, scientific picture, and become more open to the ways in which we human beings on this planet construct our own reality, construct our own truths, and that sometimes the deepest truths that we construct are truths which science simply does not have a purchase on. You know, justice, love. We don't have scientific explanations of these things, but these are for us the truest things that we build our lives around individually, that collectively we build our civilizations around. If those things aren't true, then then what is?
I think there's also something else we have lost from the discussion of truth, and that's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
That we very often that we when we talk about truth, then we often talk about science or about knowledge in some kind of, and then there's correspondence that is focusing on. But I think there's also, yeah, I would like to think of truth as something that has to do with wisdom, and then we're actually back to what is a good life. I think we are, and the thing is that this idea about wisdom and the books of wisdom, they have often come from religious. And I think when they had, yeah, I know in the Norse mythology, the book of wisdom was the god who have ascended truth into to the human beings. And I've read this book several times, and I think there's a lot of truth in several. I mean, still in those in the words that's told from yeah, so 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
One way of trying to suss out what's the difference between truth and wisdom is there's an old, I think this is an old proverb that says not everything that is true can be spoken. Not everything that can be spoken is timely to speak, and not every timely utterance can be considered as suited to the capacity of the hearer. So I think of that as a great definition of wisdom that pulls wisdom apart from truth. I mean, you can go through life just speaking the truth at every moment, and you think, oh, that's a great sort of model of being, but it quickly runs up against human reality. It's not always the best course of action to simply baldly state what you know to be true in every situation. And I suppose that could be taken as a definition of wisdom.
I read. I remember I read Gadamer. In his early writings, he says that he had met an elder man that had something important to tell him, and he was like, "But you have to prove it. You have to prove it. What you are telling me." And he was like, "I'm sorry, but the the words won't help me, but when you are old enough, then you will understand that this is the truth.
Mm.
And that gave him something. I'm not sure if I paraphrase him correctly, but I think that's what he tried to say in some way, that there are knowledge in us that we are not able to use the language to explain.
Yes. And
Mm.
that often comes with age, as the facts of matters, as the labels, as the words start to become a little bit fuzzy, the interrelationships and the more indefinable things that we take to be true come into clearer focus. But then at the same time, I think of this poem by Wordsworth, who describes the veils of the veils of glory that attend the young boy, who then, as he grows older, those that divine spark then fades into the common light of day as one gets older, as one becomes mature, as one, I suppose, becomes more cynical about the world. Something gets gained in the process of aging, but oftentimes, as Wordsworth said, something gets lost as well. And the old cynical person would say, yes, you've lost your naivete. And yes, naivete is a wonderful thing when you have it. The world is full of light and color and truth and all of that. And then as you get older and you just see how messy the world is, you realize, okay, truth is just, what the most powerful and influential narrative says it is. And you
Mm.
lose that, you lose the sparkle at the same time. You lose that sense of contact with reality, which is often a feature of a wonderful feature of youth.
There are a couple of comments I would like to briefly make. I think one um, thing that, at least for me, has become important about this whole truth thing is that we are often made to choose uh, between two sort of false choices. I mean, on the one hand, to either believe that there is some sort of that we have access to absolute truth, and that there is an there exists an absolute truth that is accessible to us, or then that there is absolutely nothing that is objective or absolute, even beyond our uh, sort of epistemological reach, and everything is just a construction of our own cultural or private minds. And I think this choice between absolutism and relativism is a sort of a false dichotomy, which is, I think both of those extremes are false, and actually there are and there is a third way, uh, which is that yes, there can be an uh, an absolute and an objective reality, but we have not access to that, and our understanding is always relative, and and the and that the question of truth does not necessarily even need to be, is this some sort of a final, absolute, eternal truth, but rather, is this the best thing that can be done, or what is the best thing that can be done at this time, in this situation, under these circumstances?
Hmm. Truth then
So
becomes something which is negotiated over time through a
exactly, and then
consultative process, rather than something which is
exactly.
delivered once and for all time.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
place, a way in which I think a religious mindset could learn from a scientific mindset. The
Mm,
scientific mindset is that's embedded in the whole scientific project, that there's no
mm,
that there's never an end to the process of learning. As the boundary of one's ignorance expands, the as the boundary of one's knowledge expands, the sort of degree to which you're touching the unknown increases as well. And so there's a sense of humility in the presence of truth, which innate
exactly.
to the
Yes,
scientific project.
yes,
Whereas
yes.
it's so often the case for a religious mindset that truth has been delivered, absolute,
mm,
unchangeable
mm,
truth has been
yes,
delivered, and now it's
mm,
just a matter of sticking as closely as possible to that. But that flies in the face of the fact that we live in a world which is constantly evolving. It's
exactly.
evolving physically, it's evolving socially. What
Hmm,
makes
hmm,
sense in the social sphere at one point in time and in one culture, in one spot on the globe, may be different from what makes sense on
hmm.
another point in time or another spot on the globe. And if there is a way to introduce this idea, which is not a concession to relativism,
No.
it's a concession to the reality that we live in a world that is evolving. We live in a world in which
Hmm,
progress is a thing. The idea of
hmm,
progress is kind of a bit of the elephant in the room here. The Greeks
hmm,
didn't really have an idea of progress. You know, they looked
hmm,
backwards to the ancient Egyptians as a greater civilization than their own. They didn't have a sense of
hmm,
human
hmm.
civilization necessarily pushing forward. That's a very modern idea. And now it's embedded in our mindset that tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday on the whole, not for everybody,
Yeah.
but overall, each generation is building upon what the generations before were able to achieve. But that idea of progress, which is now part of is embedded in our life because of science and technology, that's not yet been internalized in our religious perspectives. Our religious perspectives are not progressive.
No.
Our religious perspectives tend to be much more essentialistic. They look backwards for our closest contact with truth and reality, whereas in the scientific mindset, you're always looking forwards. You know, we're always going to know more tomorrow than we did yesterday. But with
Hmm,
a traditional religious mindset, they knew more back then at the origin point when
hmm,
the revelation was sent down, and now we're
hmm,
just clinging,
hmm,
trying to keep the thing from slipping from our fingers, which is
hmm,
it's two very different ways of looking. But I think
hmm,
it's possible for there to be a spiritual, and I don't see any way forward other than for religion, other than finding a way to do an about face and to turn its gaze from the past to the future in terms of where our closest encounter with the truth, where our closest encounter with God is going to be, and it's
hmm,
going to be in the future, and that's going to entail necessarily a change and an evolution of things that people considered unchangeable and sacred and social teachings, what you can and can't eat, who you can marry, who gets to participate, all these things which are features of time and place and culture, those are all changeable.
But
There,
yes,
there ought to
and
Mhm.
sorry, go ahead.
uh, just some comment, because I think there's a lot of thing that is changeable, but I wonder also if there could be something that is not changeable.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And this is,
yeah,
Oh,
for me,
absolutely.
it's
absolutely.
a little bit important, because
Yeah.
we can discuss, or we can criticize uh, yeah, action and rituals and these kind of and also some of the knowledge we have, or the words we are trying to, the narratives we have in the religious or the scientific
Hmm.
world, but still there are narratives, or there are existential dimension, or there are yeah, what I would say, some kind of notion with divinity.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
these,
What?
and that's one of the things that I mean is important. And also, I think it's when we talk about developing, what are we developing towards? Are we actually trying to get closer to truth,
Hmm.
or are we more or less just not caring about truth and more focusing on, like,
mm,
let's say, technological improvement,
Hmm.
material,
mm,
yeah, whatever. I
Hmm.
think that's also something that is important, and in many ways, okay, I choose truth as like my way of trying to be in the world.
mm,
But of course,
Hmm.
it's not it's not like, okay, everybody do that, or everybody. But in my, and that's also something we started this whole conversation, Stephen, that we, what is the purpose of of being at the university? for me, it's actually to try to find truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, I know that I will never do it. But
Yes.
I won't stop anyway, and because there's something in me that just goes on in this, traveling.
Yeah, there is a, I think there's a analogy. I don't remember the name of the person who put it forward, but I think it's a rather simple analogy that, in my mind, sort of includes all of these various strains of thought that we have just covered now during the past, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. And that's the analogy of truth being a process of creation, which is very much like a jazz jam session, where jazz players are not playing according to a sort of existing composition, but jamming, having a jam session. And this person says that, okay, so Stephen plays something on his piano, and I can come in with my bass, and I can respond to that in many different ways, but not in any way. I mean, there's a limit to what notes can come in after certain notes that have been initially played. It can't be just anything. There is a so it's again, it's not absolutely this note, but it's not either that any note. And so I think this is beautiful because it shows that how then this playing, I mean, the beauty of the melody evolves, and you together discover various ways of giving expression. Was that?
Yeah. So what you're describing, I don't know if you've read this little book. It's called The Meaning
No.
of Life, a very short introduction by Terry Eagleton. He goes through
No.
the different possibilities, and he
Yeah.
lands on exactly what you've said. He said the
Right.
best analogy, perhaps, is not the concert hall where everyone is playing every note as written, but it's a
Yes.
jazz jam session where there
Yeah.
are rules. There is a beat. There's a
Yeah.
chord progression that's been set. How we can leave open for the moment, but the point is
Yeah.
that is that people are jamming to something which is such a beautiful analogy because it allows such a much greater degree of individual range of individual expression, and it also I think takes truth out of the realm of something that's fixed into something that's dynamic and moving.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
think, well, what grammatical category is truth in? Is truth a noun or a verb or an adjective? Maybe it's helpful to ask that question at some point. A noun can be a very fixed thing. A horse is a horse, and our notion of that doesn't change much in time. But if truth is not so much a noun like that, but something more like a verb, ultimate truth is something which is in motion, and progress itself may be an expression of that. Progress may be an expression of spirit in the realm of matter, to use one framework to think about it. Then what is that what is that verb then that truth is? Well, it could be love. That's one possibility. Love unfolding itself over time, and we see that in the physical world, and we call that, say, gravity at one level, or we call it metabolism at another level. If we look at how cells move and grow and aggregate and so forth, or we can call it human love. We can call it, the progress of civilization as people, become link together their minds in greater and greater coherent structures that unleashes in turn greater capacities of consciousness and greater potentialities of what, at least at some level, we might call love. So then truth becomes not a thing that's dead and crystallized, that you're always looking backwards to and trying to build more and more elaborate structures to protect and preserve, but rather it's a stream that you enter into and you participate in. It becomes a participatory process.
Exactly.
Just
And
like
so
a
it's
jazz
not,
band.
yeah, Yes, exactly. And so because I think, I mean, and now we have been talking about Plato, and like traditionally the search for truth was a purely, how would I say, abstract, theoretical, let's sit down and discuss different things. But that truth can be also a socially creative process where we together seek to sort of manifest those perfect forms in this imperfect world of ours, and see which applications of our notions of those forms really work well, and that could be one way of sort of, as it were, trying to find the truth by trying to pull it into our dimension, and see whether it works or not.
And that
So
differs, and that may differ from age to age, from person to person. But
yeah,
saying that doesn't is not a concession to, oh, it's all relative and therefore anything
exactly.
goes. It's not a concession at all. It's
Hmm.
it's a redefinition to that becomes more process oriented than thing oriented.
Yeah,
Alfred North
yeah.
Whitehead, I think, was really onto something, and he's, I think, legendarily difficult to penetrate and to understand. But he was a brilliant mind of the early 20th century who had the same intuition. He was a mathematician who partnered up with Bertrand Russell in the Principia
Mm,
Mathematica. But he later on had this idea that, hold on, at the foundation of things, it makes more sense to talk about process than to talk about, the fixed atoms, the fixed things as being the ground of reality. Let's see how far we can get if we take the ground of reality to be a verb rather than a noun, to be a process of
mm,
unfolding rather than something that's fundamentally static. And
I,
it's not an easy philosophy to follow, but I think it's the
mm.
right track.
Yeah.
I like this idea about jamming, and when you talked about Plato, because he writes in dialogues, and I think often you can see, right, you can read those dialogues at different jam sessions of
Yeah.
the
Ah,
same
brilliant.
topic
Yeah,
in some
yeah, yeah.
time.
Hmm.
And of course, also when I'm at my university, I would say that I have these jam sessions sometimes with my
Mm,
colleagues, and but then often it's like I've heard it before. I mean,
Mm.
it's not much much new. Whitehead, he I think he says in some of his writings says that what has been done after Plato are more or less just footnotes.
Footnotes. But
But
yeah, as is
so
this famous
what we are
quotation, I think.
doing is we are still
Yeah.
in the jam session with Plato.
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
but
Still jamming.
And the reason is that most of those questions that we are raising and that university are raising is question that he actually was raising.
yeah,
There's not many questions that he didn't raise.
Yep.
So
but
that's and of course I often when I meet younger academic colleagues, then I often think that it's like they have to go through the same process I myself did.
Mm.
So what they're doing is not like writing something new, but they're like they have to walk the same steps in
mm,
this process, and also there might be progress, but I'm not sure always, especially in my field. In the field of philosophy, I'm sure I
mm,
often think that we are just
Hashing
either
and
we are
rehashing the same old things.
hmm?
Rehashing the same old things, not making
mm.
progress.
Yeah, or
But
just penetrating one very small um, thought that has not been. I mean, just a small puzzle in a huge picture we are focusing on.
mm, mm,
This might have been mentioned in one of our previous conversations, but I believe David Chalmers at one point did a survey of active professional philosophers, a few hundred people or something, and asked what was their opinion on fundamental questions of philosophy.
mm,
Motion versus change, God, no God. All
mm,
the
mm,
all the questions that Plato initially raised,
mm,
just to see has any consensus emerged on
mm,
any of the fundamental questions of philosophy. And he found there was
mm,
no consensus on any of it.
Mm.
And this is despite, you know, now a couple of hundred years of you know, intense professional effort on the part of people whose lives and livelihoods are now spent on addressing these questions. It's no longer just an armchair sport, and still no progress has been made in answering the fundamental questions. But I don't see that as a failure. I see that more as an extremely useful data point that tells us something about the nature of what philosophy is and what it isn't. You know, if we think it's the correspondence theory of truth, and then we're eventually over time going to maybe asymptotically get closer to the form of truth, which is A and not B, that's not what it is, because we're not reaching consensus on any of these things.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, that leads me to think that something that I think is common between traditional religious thinking and prevailing traditional educational thinking, and is very, I would say, dangerous and misleading, is this fixation on having or finding the right answer rather than having our, and we have talked about this maybe in another context before, but rather than having a focus on asking new questions. And I think this is why we sort of get stuck in certain positions, because there are only that many possible right answers, and then and I think the only way that we can get out of that is by starting to think of new questions, and I think our schools should be much more questioning and question oriented than trying to get the right answers, as it were, to in the heads of the students. And I think even in connection with religious or spiritual questions, we should be daring to ask questions and to question things, because I think there is no danger in totally questioning any belief. Questioning, is there really a God, even if you are very convinced that there is one, because if the existence of God is real, then there must be good answers, that it sort of withstands that questioning.
Or if
And
maybe
and
not
if it doesn't,
answers, but maybe
well, something, yeah. But I mean, anyway, that in my mind, I see it as, if you can picture, a ball that's on top of a curve, because it is the equilibrium is very sensitive. You just need to poke it a little bit, and it will fall down one side or other. But then, if the ball is there in a valley, in like there, you can hit it very hard. It will go up and it will fall down back in that position. So to me, truth is a little bit like that. If something is true, you can question it, you can bash it, you can look at it from different angles, and you more or less end up, okay, you find definitely new aspects, but I mean, it sort of holds itself. But if it's not true, then it will not. And it's, I mean, what? Why should we? I mean, I think this is more a psychological thing, that we'd rather maintain our how to say, our current state of certitude, rather than go for the truth.
I really like I like the metaphor or the picture on the truth, and I think if we also connect that to the jam session, then when the ball is like turning from side to side in the curve, then it's like a jam session, and I think it's also interesting that you said in the jam session that we there are only you can't do whatever. It has to, you have to correspond and to connect, and to be coherent with the others. And I noticed I was listening to a Norwegian philosopher. He said that more or less there are only 8 different perspectives on truth. That's what it is. That's what he had found. And it's interesting. So,
Only 8.
Only 8. That was like, there are 8 different theories, and that's what is possible. Yeah. So it's like a jam session, and we have 8 different balls or 8 different instruments, and then we have to,
yeah. I think of truth as like as a big landscape, not truth, but our theories about truth as this big space in which it's filled with a tangle of threads that are in every direction, hanging in space. And the starting point of every thread are the premises of that particular argument, of that particular system of knowledge. And then the thread itself is what logically follows from those premises. But there's a tangle of them because every system starts with different premises. And some premises are just adjacent to another set of premises, but the threads still go off in completely opposite directions, because even though, sometimes a minor adjustment in a premise can lead to a major adjustment in the conclusion. And so where is the truth to be found? One has to make sure that one is exploring a wide enough possible space of the premises to be sure that you're exploring the possible space of solutions. If the solutions are what result from the premises and then all of the steps that follow. If you're not, think of it's like a map with the terrain, and you're parachuting down, an agent who's going to explore that local terrain. And if that local terrain is like a deep valley, then when you parachute down, you're not going to sort of see what's possible outside that deep valley, because your agent can't sort of get out of the valley. So you have to be sure to parachute down to a broad enough sampling of the terrain to make sure you've fully explored it, which is another way of saying we should be always open-minded enough to explore radically different premises, because they might unexpectedly lead us to useful or more correct, depending on how we define it, conclusions. Which is why, again, going back to what Carl Sagan said, I think I mentioned this last week. I love the statement about science. On the one hand, you're maximally open to new ideas, and on the other hand, you're maximally skeptical about those new ideas, and you interrogate them hard. But along with that hard interrogation of new ideas should come a really broad openness to all sorts of different premises, all sorts of different arguments. Of course, in reality, we have limited time. People have limited time, and so they take shortcuts and say, "Well, this whole category of premises I can eliminate because I don't have time for it, because I've decided that this other category of premises is more likely." And that's what people do in practice. But there's 7 billion of us on the planet. I think there's enough of us to explore different premises and see where they go.
Yeah, I think the circle is sort of closing, coming back to these premises in some strange way. This reminded me, all of a sudden, I hadn't thought this for decades, but back in the early 80s, I had a conversation with a friend who was a Soviet citizen, actually a literature person. But anyway, so he came to Finland, where I used to live in that time, and we had a conversation. And he was very adamant, the great evil in the world was the United States, and we had to get rid of the United States and its capitalism and so forth. And then I asked him a question. I said, so what do you think is more important? Destroying the United States and in the process risking the destruction of the entire planet as a result of the nuclear war, or somehow tolerating the United States and saving humanity from destruction? And he couldn't answer that. Or he didn't want, for him, this aggression towards the United States and the need to destroy the United States was so great that it wasn't at all obvious to him that it would be too high a price to pay if the whole world was destroyed in the process. And I think this is what, in the end, sort of makes it important, really, not only like what is the truth, but to what purpose do we want to know the truth? I mean, in that sense, like the premises. What is, because if the truth, I mean,
If
in
the
the
truth
Bible
leads
it
to our
says
own
how it's,
destruction, if the
yeah,
truth leads
exactly.
to the
Truth should
destruction
make
of
us
humanity,
truth,
are we okay with
exactly.
that?
Yeah,
Or,
exactly.
or do we actually need to leave
Exactly.
somehow a better place for us?
Yeah. I mean, the Bible says that the truth shall make us free. But I mean, if the truth shall destroy us, is that still the truth, or is that a reason to pursue truth? So yeah, I think somehow I mean, even truth is I mean, has a purpose, and then we should think of what is the purpose of pursuing truth.
There's normally to differ between the moral rationality and the logical rationality, or the scientific rationality. And yeah, what you're saying is that we should always try to keep like having the moral rationality as the goal, as the purpose of what we are trying to strive for. And I think that's also something I can find a lot of in teacher education, actually, that when teachers do something in the classroom, and they say that, yeah, but science told me that this was the correct way of learn, that the children should learn more efficient, then it's pretty easy to ask them, but is this morally correct to do? Would you? And I think a lot of more experienced teachers, they use their moral sense to choose the truth. But but of course, truth is not connected to science or but it's also to the moral or the aesthetical or the even the metaphysical part of
Exactly.
rationality, and also the emotional part of rationality. So we have to broaden our understanding of rationality, and that's something that is. I remember Habermas. He said in the 80s that taste and ethics should still be part of rationality, and not only the scientific, and especially because, of course, then we could also discuss what is science and what is not science, because I would say that moral is also part of the scientific studies. In philosophy, it will be. And it's, of course, if you're studying, doing research in teacher education, and of course you have to be aware of the moral dimension of what you are doing, what is the purpose of what you are doing.
Well, that's why we are talking about bringing together Athens and Jerusalem. So, yeah, let's continue from this perspective next time.
Will do. So thank you for this time.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been, again, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Always fun.
It
Always
was
a good
great
jam
fun.
session.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer, and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.